The Last Chapter Bookshop. Logline. Some books you don't just read. You live them, and they start living in you. Episode 1. The Customer Who Wasn't There. The bell above the door of the Last Chapter Bookshop didn't so much jingle as sigh, a soft, tired sound that was swallowed by the silence and the dust. Leo Mercer, a 30-year-old copywriter whose own life felt like a first draft full of red marks, stepped inside. He was adrift, laid off, dumped, and plagued by a writer's block that felt less like a wall and more like a vast, foggy plain. He needed a place to hide, and this shop, crammed between a shuttered laundromat and a psychic parlor whose neon sign buzzed fitfully, seemed like the perfect tomb for ambition. The air was thick with the smell of aging paper, cracked leather, and something else. Ozone, like after a storm, or the static charge before a television turns on. The shelves were a chaotic maze, leaning under the weight of forgotten histories, unsolved mysteries, and romances that had long since cooled. Looking or finding? The voice was dry as autumn leaves. Rose Dairy emerged from behind a curtain of hanging crystal prisms that cast fractured rainbows on the floorboards. She was older than the shop itself, it seemed, with eyes the color of polished flint and fingers stained with what could have been ink or something else. Just browsing, Leo said, his own voice feeling too loud. Browsing is for supermarkets, Rose said, not unkindly. Here you find, or it finds you. The returns section is in the back. Mind the cat. The cat, a one-eyed Persian the color of dust, watched him from atop a pile of encyclopedias with a disconcerting stillness. Leo navigated the narrow aisles toward the back, where a single, unadorned bookshelf stood in a dim pool of light from a single bare bulb. A handwritten card, pinned with a rusted thumbtack, read simply, "Returns." The books here didn't have glossy covers or bold titles. They were bound in cloth, leather, even what looked like wood or rough canvas. Their spines bore handwritten labels. His fingers trailed over them, the anatomy of certainty, songs the sirens didn't sing. Then one pulled at him. The label, in a precise, elegant script, read, "The Resonance of Silence" by Leo Mercer. His blood ran cold. He pulled it out. It was a slim volume, bound in gray linen. He opened it to a random page. The prose was crisp, hauntingly beautiful, describing the exact texture of loneliness he'd felt staring at his blank computer screen that morning. It was his style, but refined, perfected. It was the book he had been trying to write for 5 years. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the copyright page. Publication date, next year. He stumbled back to the front, book clutched to his chest like a stolen relic. This? How much for this? Rose glanced at the spine, then at his face. A flicker of something, pity, recognition, passed in her eyes. For that. It's not for sale. It's a return. It goes back on a shelf. But it has my name on it. Many books have names on them. Doesn't mean they belong to the people who bear them. That book found its way here. It's waiting. Waiting for what? For its reader to be ready. You, Mr. Mercer, are not ready. You're desperate. Desperation makes for a terrible reader. It makes you greedy. You want to consume the story, not understand it. Her tone was final. Now, I have a first edition of M.R. James with your name on it. Metaphorically speaking. Much safer. Leo left, but not before slipping the gray book inside his coat. The guilt was a sharp stone in his gut, but the pull of the words, his words, was stronger. The one-eyed cat watched him leave, its tail giving a single, slow swish. As the door sighed shut, Rose didn't look up from her ledger. She simply wrote, in a column titled New Arrivals/Active Loans, Mercer L. Resonance. Stage 1. Curiosity/theft. Likely outcome, assimilation. Episode 2. The first read. Leo's apartment was a monument to his stalled life. Takeout containers, disconnected cables, a desk holding a laptop as blank as his future. He placed the stolen book on his kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light, as if that could dispel its mystery. He read the first page, then the second. It was hypnotic. The protagonist was a sound engineer who had lost his hearing in a tragic accident, only to discover he could now hear the frequencies of emotions, the silent screams of buildings, the whispered histories of objects. It was brilliant. It was his idea, the one he'd scribbled in a notebook years ago and never developed. But here was fully formed prose so fluid it felt like it was being poured directly into his mind. He read for hours, forgetting to eat, to drink. The world outside his window dissolved into the world inside the book, a world of nuanced soundscapes and profound isolation. When he finally finished the last sentence, a haunting, ambiguous line about silence being the only true music, he felt a profound sense of loss, as if he'd said goodbye to a dear friend. And then, a surge of elation. He had done it. He had written this. The proof was in his hands. He rushed to his laptop, fingers flying over the keys. He would transcribe it, claim it, make it his own. But as he typed the first chapter, something felt wrong. The words on his screen were flat, dead things. They were the same words from the book, but they lacked the magic, the resonance. Frustrated, he grabbed the gray book to check a passage. The text had changed, not dramatically. A word was different here, a sentence structure altered there. The description of the protagonist's childhood home was now eerily similar to Leo's grandmother's house in Maine, a detail he'd never included in his own notes. A chill crept up his spine. He flipped to another chapter. The sound engineer's traumatic accident. Now it happened on a bridge called Grayview Span. Leo felt a jolt. He'd been in a minor fender bender on a bridge with that name years ago. The book was adapting, mirroring him. Or was it feeding? He slammed it shut. This was impossible. A trick of his tired mind. He needed sleep. He hid the book in a drawer, burying it under old bills, a symbolic act of repression. That night, he dreamed not of the story, but of the bookshop. He was in the returns section, but the shelves stretched into infinity. Rose Derry stood at the end of the aisle, the one-eyed cat weaving around her ankles. "You took a story that wasn't finished with its last reader," she said, her voice echoing as if down a long pipe. "Now it needs a new one to write the ending. Or we'll write yours." Leo woke with a start, his ears ringing. Not with sound, but with a profound, pressurized silence. The hum of his refrigerator was gone. The distant traffic noise had vanished. For one terrifying, exhilarating moment, he heard nothing at all, just like the protagonist in the book. Then the sounds rushed back. But something was different. The drip of his kitchen faucet had a melancholy, musical pitch it never had before. The rustle of his sheets sounded like whispered secrets. He sat in the dark, heart pounding. It was just a dream, a powerful suggestion from the novel. He got up for a glass of water. In the dark living room, he saw a faint, grayish glow emanating from the drawer where he'd hidden the book. Episode 3. Echoes in the Static. The glow was gone by morning, but the world wasn't. Leo's newfound awareness of sound persisted. It wasn't supernatural hearing. He couldn't hear conversations through walls. It was a qualitative shift. The angry beep of a car horn carried a metallic taste of frustration. His neighbor's cheerful morning whistling had visible, golden harmonics in his mind's eye. It was beautiful and deeply unnerving. He went back to the bookshop. He had to talk to Rose. The bell sighed its familiar sigh, but the silence inside felt watchful, expectant. The one-eyed cat was on the counter, licking a paw with deliberate care. Rose was at her desk, repairing a spine with surgical precision. She didn't look up. "Returning your ill-gotten gains, Mr. Mercer? Or here, for another taste?" "Something's happening to me," Leo blurted out, his voice too loud in the hushed space. Of course it is. You read a living book. Did you think it would just give you plot points and a theme? She finally looked at him, her flinty eyes assessing. You started to resonate with its frequency. The protagonist's curse is becoming yours. A mild case for now. What is this place? What are these books? The returns are stories that didn't find a proper home. Stories whose readers died, or gave up, or went mad. Stories that were loved too violently, or not at all. They echo. They look for new readers to complete their emotional circuits, to give them meaning, or to consume that meaning for themselves. She nodded at the book he'd placed on the counter. The resonance of silence belonged to a composer who went deaf. He tried to write the sounds he could no longer hear. He poured his grief, his rage, his entire soul into the idea of this book. He died before he could write a single word of the actual novel. The book arrived here the next day, full of his unfinished symphony. You're the first it's chosen since. Leo felt the weight of it. How do I give it back? Make it stop. You can't give it back. You've opened a channel. The connection weakens if you truly walk away, if you find a louder, brighter story for your own life. Or it strengthens until the line between you and the protagonist blurs entirely. You'll start to see his world. Then you might start to act in it. That's insane. Is it? She pointed a bony finger past him into the shadows of the shop. See that woman in the poetry section? Leo turned. A mousy woman in her 40s was gently pulling a small, moss-green volume from a shelf. As her fingers touched it, Leo heard something, a faint, sweet, sorrowful chord, like a music box underwater. He gasped. What was that? The book greeting its reader. A love sonnet sequence written by a soldier in the trenches. Never sent. She needs to feel loved. It needs to be read. A fair trade. Rose's voice dropped. But your book and you, it's a more dangerous pairing. You're not seeking comfort. You're seeking validation. Yourself is what's on the menu. The book will rewrite you to fit its narrative until the Leo Mercer who walked in here is just a footnote in someone else's tragedy. As if on cue, a sharp, discordant note jangled in Leo's inner ear, a sound of pure dissonance. It came from the direction of the returns section. He and Rose looked over. A man in a rumpled suit was standing there, running his hands over the spines. He had a gaunt, hungry look. Leo recognized the dissonance. It was the sound of envy, of entitlement. And it was coming from the man, but also from the books around him. They were reacting. Ah, Rose said softly, a true note of concern in her voice for the first time. He's been coming for weeks. He wants a book on vast wealth, instant success. The books sense his hunger, but they recoil from it. It's not a story he wants. It's a pill. He's getting desperate, and desperate people in this section. She trailed off. You should go, Mr. Mercer, and watch your dreams. That's where it writes its first drafts. Leo left, more afraid than when he arrived. That night, he tried to drink himself to sleep to avoid dreaming. It didn't work. The dream was vivid. He was the sound engineer, standing on the Grayview span in the rain, tuning a massive, esoteric device that looked like a cross between a radio telescope and an organ. He was trying to tune into the frequency of forgiveness from the driver who had hit him, but his hands, slick with rain, slipped on the dials. The device emitted a shriek of feedback, a physical wave that shattered the bridge's windows and made his own teeth vibrate. In the dream, he looked down at his hands. They were his hands, but scarred with old nicks and a burn he'd gotten from soldering iron last year. The protagonist's biography was grafting onto his own. He woke not to silence, but to a single, clear, sustained note, a pure A above middle C, hanging in the center of his room. It faded after a few seconds, leaving behind a scent of ozone and old paper. On his desk, a single sentence was typed on his previously blank laptop screen. The bridge is waiting. Finish the tune. Episode 4. The Hungry Man. The typed sentence was the final straw. This was beyond suggestion, beyond lucid dreaming. The story was invading. Leo knew, with the cold clarity of terror, that Rose was his only lifeline. He returned to the shop, the gray book shoved in his backpack, a toxic talisman. This time, the atmosphere was different. The usual dusty peace was taut, strained. The crystal prisms hung still, no rainbows on the floor. The one-eyed cat was nowhere to be seen. Rose was at the back, near the returns section, speaking in a low, firm voice to the gaunt, hungry man from the previous day. The man, his name, Leo would learn, was Alistair Finch, was vibrating with a tense, needful energy. The dissonant chord of his envy was now a grating, a tonal thrum that set Leo's teeth on edge. "You don't understand," Finch hissed, his voice like tearing cloth. "I need it. There must be one. A book on the Philosopher's Stone, on a lucky charm, on a stock market tip from the future. I've seen the others find their little treasures." He gestured wildly, his hands sweeping near the spines. "Mr. Finch," Rose said, her voice like cool iron, "the books you seek don't exist here. Or if they did, they've been consumed. Stories about easy wealth are often read by desperate, greedy minds. They burn out quickly. They leave nothing but ash and a craving. You're not looking for a story. You're looking for a spell. This is a library, not a grimoire." "Liar," Finch spat. He lunged, not at Rose, but at the shelf, grabbing a random book bound in what looked like scales. The moment his fingers closed on it, a physical sound erupted, a deep, guttural roar of wrongness, of violation. Finch screamed, jerking his hand back as if burned. The book fell to the floor, and a dark, viscous liquid, not ink, seeped from its pages, smelling of copper and rot. The shop reacted. All around them, a low whisper rose, the sound of 1,000 pages turning at once. The light from the bare bulb flickered. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and thicken. Rose's face went pale. "You fool. You've forced a connection. A violent one. It will defend itself." Finch, cradling his hand, which was now blistering with strange, word-shaped welts, stared in horror at the spreading stain. Then his eyes, wide with panic and a dawning, twisted insight, locked onto Leo's backpack. Leo had instinctively clutched it to his chest. "You," Finch breathed. "You have one. I can see it glowing around you. A story that wants to be told. Give it to me. It can fix this. It can fix me." "He can't give it to you," Rose said, stepping between them. Her frail body seemed to gain substance, drawing authority from the very shells around her. "The bond is made. Trying to take it would be worse than what you just did. Now leave, before the shop decides you're a pest to be removed." The threat in her words was unmistakable. The whispering grew louder, forming almost words, hisses of "out, thief mine." Finch looked from Rose's stern face to the malignant book on the floor, to Leo's terrified expression. The hunger in his eyes was now pure, undiluted survival instinct. He wasn't looking for wealth anymore. He was looking for a story powerful enough to save him from the one he'd just awakened. With a final, venomous look at Leo, he turned and fled, the shop door slamming shut behind him with a crash that was not the sound of the sighing bell. The moment he was gone, the whispering subsided. The light steadied. Rose sagged against a shelf, looking ancient. She gestured to the oozing book. The one-eyed cat emerged from the shadows and began to cautiously clean the foul liquid, its tongue seemingly unfazed. "He'll be back," Rose said wearily. "For you, or for another book." Once the hunger is awakened, it doesn't sleep. It's a different kind of reader. A parasite. She fixed her eyes on Leo. And you, the bridge in your dream. The grave you span. It's real. It's about 20 miles from here, out on the old county road. Leo felt the world tilt. What happens if I go there? In your story, what was the protagonist trying to do there? Tune into a frequency to find peace, to understand the accident. Rose nodded. The book is creating a focal point, a stage for its climax. It's pulling elements from your subconscious and from its own narrative to build set. If you go to the bridge, you will be stepping into the book. The lines will blur completely. You might become the character fully, or you might become a ghost in his machine. And if I don't go, then it will bring the bridge to you, in your dreams, in your perceptions. It will twist your reality until the bridge is all that's left. You're in the second act, Mr. Mercer. The third act demands a setting. She looked at the stain on the floor, now almost gone. And we have another problem now. Finch. He's tasted the power of these books, even if it burned him. He'll want more. And he knows you have a live one. You're not just a reader anymore. You're a target. As if summoned by her words, Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. A text message. It was a photo, slightly blurred, taken from outside his apartment window. It showed him sitting at his desk last night. The caption read, "Every story needs a good editor. Let's discuss yours." AF. Finch had found him. Episode 5, Building the Set. Paranoia became Leo's new co-pilot. He saw Finch's gaunt face in every crowded street, heard the dissonant thrum of his envy in the buzz of his own faulty kitchen light. He barricaded himself in his apartment, the gray book now a pulsating heart of dread in the center of his living room floor. He was afraid to touch it, but more afraid to let it out of his sight. The invasion of his senses escalated. It was no longer just poignant sounds. He began to see overlays. Walking to the corner store, the pavement would momentarily flicker into the rain-slicked asphalt of the Graveview span. The rumble of a truck became the specific, groaning metal fatigue of the bridge in a strong wind. He caught his reflection in a window and for a split second saw not his own stubbled, tired face, but the sharper, more angular features of the sound engineer, Elias Thorne, a name that had come to him in a dream. Worst were the echoes. He'd hear a fragment of a conversation that hadn't happened yet, or that was happening blocks away with perfect clarity. Always a conversation about loss, accidents, or silence. The book was tuning his reality to its frequency, filtering out anything that didn't fit its tragic, resonant narrative. He spent a feverish night online, researching the Graveview span. It was a real, little-used bridge from the 1930s, slated for demolition next year. Its history was unremarkable except for a cluster of minor accidents. And one suicide. 20 years ago, a musician, a violinist who had lost his hearing in one ear. The name was not Elias Thorne, but the parallel was close enough to make Leo nauseous. The book was weaving fact, fiction, and his own psyche into a seamless, inescapable tapestry. He knew Finch was circling. The text became more frequent, less veiled. A protagonist is nothing without conflict. Let me be yours. I've been reading about bridges. So symbolic. A crossing. A fall. Leo was trapped between two horrors. The slow, literary digestion by the story and the violent, immediate threat of Finch. In a moment of clarity, he realized the book was his only potential weapon. If it had power, perhaps he could learn to wield it just a little. Not to become Elias Thorne, but to use Thorne's tools. Hesitantly, he opened the gray book again, not to read the story, but to listen to it. He let his mind go quiet, focusing on the pressure in his ears, the new sense he'd developed. He placed his palms on the open pages. A symphony of sorrow washed over him. Not sound, but the essence of sound. Grief in a low C minor chord. Rage as a crashing cymbal. Loneliness as a single, sustained violin note. And beneath it all, the objective of Elias Thorne. A pure, perfect chord of understanding. It was the frequency the character sought, a harmonic resolution to his trauma. Leo gasped, pulling his hands away. He understood now. The book wasn't just telling a story, it was broadcasting an emotional equation. Thorne's journey was the attempt to solve for X, where X was peace. And by resonating with the book, Leo was being forced to walk the same path, to solve the same unsolvable problem with the pieces of his own life. His phone rang, shattering the fragile connection. It was Rose. Come to the shop. Now, the back door, and bring the book. Her voice was tight with urgency. Why? What's happened? Finch happened. He broke in last night. He didn't take anything. He left something. When Leo slipped in through the dusty, cobweb back entrance, the scene in the main shop stopped him cold. The returns section was in disarray, and in the center of the floor, arranged in a crude, jagged circle, were 7 books from the section. They were all open to their first pages. From each, a different foul sound emanated, visible to Leo as a twisted, discolored aura. The greasy brown pulse of betrayal, the jagged yellow shards of madness, the sickly green drip of sickness. The circle hummed with malignant power, a trap designed not to steal, but to corrupt, to poison the well of stories. Rose stood outside the circle, looking older and more frail than ever. He's trying to create a sympathetic reaction, to agitate all the unstable narratives, to cause a feedback loop. He thinks if he can create enough chaos, the books will surrender their secrets, or a deus ex machina will fall into his lap. She looked at Leo, her eyes grave. He's accelerating things. This kind of discord, it will affect every act of connection, including yours. Your third act just got a deadline. As she spoke, Leo felt a new pressure, different from the book's resonant pull. This was a suction, a drain. The circle of poisoned books was pulling at the energy of his own connection, trying to unravel it and feed on the pieces. The gray book in his backpack grew warm, then hot. A single, clear note, the A from his bedroom, rang out in the shop, pure and defiant against the dissonance. The one-eyed cat yowled, a sound of warning. From the front of the shop, they heard the sigh of the bell. Then Finch's voice, sing-song and unhinged, called out, "Knock, knock. Time for the book report, boys and girls. I've come to collect my editor's fee." He was here, and the bridge in Leo's soul and in the real world was waiting, its final, terrible scene demanding to be played out. Episode 6, The Poisoned Circle. The pure from Leo's book clashed with the dissonant cacophony of Finch's circle, creating a physical vibration in the air. Dust motes danced in agitated swirls. The one-eyed cat, Payuakit, the name popped into Leo's head, unbidden from some long-forgotten story, arched its back for standing on end, its single eye fixed on the front of the shop. "Stay here," Rose whispered, her voice thin but steel-edged. She moved with a sudden, startling speed, not towards the front, but deeper into the maze of shelves, vanishing into the shadows. Finch's footsteps were deliberate, crunching on the grit of the floor. "I can feel it," he crooned. The little struggling story. The little man trying to be an author of his own life. "It's pathetic. Give me the book, Leo. Let me have the power. I'll write you a better ending. A quick one." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. The pull from the poisoned circle was a nausea in his soul, a dizzying lure towards despair. His book's warmth was a lifeline, but it was also the bait. He clutched his backpack. "You don't understand what you're playing with, Finch," Leo called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. His own voice sounded strange to him, layered with a faint, resonant echo. Elias Thorne's timbre. "I understand hunger," Finch spat, rounding a corner into view. He looked worse. The welts on his hand had spread up his wrist, the word-shaped blisters pulsing a dull purple. His eyes were fever-bright. "I understand that this place has magic, and you're hoarding it. That book is singing to me, a song of becoming. Give it." He lunged, not at Leo, but at the backpack on the floor. As his blistered hand touched the canvas, the gray book inside erupted. Not in light, but in sound. A concussive wave of raw, structured audio, the entire emotional arc of the resonance of silence compressed into a single, devastating chord, shot outwards. It threw Finch back against a shelf of gardening manuals. It shattered the poisonous circle of books, sending them slamming shut, their malignant auras snuffing out like choked flames. The pure notes sustained, vibrating in Leo's teeth, in the bones of the shop. And in that note, Leo saw, not with his eyes. It was a synaptic, direct download of setting. The grave U span, not as a memory or a photo, but as a living, dimensional blueprint. He felt its rusted rivets, the specific crack in the pedestrian walkway, the exact pitch of the wind whistling through its iron girders. He knew its frequency. The book had just given him the coordinates. Finch groaned, pushing himself up. Hatred contorted his features. But before he could move, the shadows behind him coalesced. Rose emerged, holding not a weapon, but a book, a huge, ledger-like tome bound in what looked like lead. It was utterly silent, a void of sound. "This is the log," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "The record of every book that has ever come through here. Its story is order. Its frequency is stillness." She opened it. Nothing audible happened, but to Leo's new sense, it was like a black hole opening. All sound, all dissonance, all the agitated psychic noise in the shop was sucked towards it and silenced. Finch's envious thrum was severed. The last echoes of Leo's book were dampened. The world went flat, dead, acoustically sterile. It was more terrifying than any noise. Finch screamed, but the sound was thin, swallowed by the ledger. He clutched his ears. "Stop it. You're killing it. You're killing the magic." "I'm imposing silence," Rose said coldly. "The first tool of a librarian. Now, get out. Your card is revoked. Permanently." She took a step forward, the open ledger held before her like a shield. Finch scrambled back, his bravado gone, replaced by the raw terror of a creature being unmade. He fled, crashing out the front door into the alley, his screams fading into the city's white noise. Rose closed the ledger with a soft thump. The familiar, dusty soundscape of the shop rushed back in, a comforting whisper after the dead silence. She sagged, the effort visibly draining her. "He'll be back," Leo said, echoing her earlier words. "Not here. The log has marked him. The shop will misdirect him now. He'll find the door leads somewhere else. But he's your problem now, Leo. He's tied to your story, through envy, through conflict. The book has accepted him as an antagonist." She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "And you have your setting. You saw it, didn't you?" Leo nodded. The image of the bridge seared into his mind. "It gave me the bridge, like a map. Because it's time, the narrative pressure is too great. You have to go to the grave you span. You have to play out the third act, on your terms, not just as the book's puppet. You have to finish Elias Thorne's tune or break the instrument. Otherwise, the story will collapse in on itself, taking you and likely a piece of this reality with it. And Finch, he'll be drawn to the climax, like a scavenger to a dying beast." She reached under the counter and pulled out a small, felt-wrapped bundle. Inside was an old, tarnished brass tuning fork. This is from the composer, the one who started your book. It's inert. It holds no story, but it holds intent. He meant to tune the world. Take it. You might need a tool that is purely your own. Leo took the cold, heavy fork. It felt like a skeleton key to nothing. Go tonight, Rose said. The line between worlds is thinnest at the witching hour. And Leo, remember the most important rule of any story. The ending is always a choice. Episode 7, Tuning the Night. The Graveview span stood skeletal against a bruised, purple twilight sky. It was exactly as the book had shown him. The rust, the specific crack, the lonely sodium lamp at its midpoint flickering with a dying buzz. The sound here was oppressive. Not silence, but a heavy, metallic drone. The groan of aging iron, the distant, mournful cry of a train, the river below, whispering secrets of cold and depth. Leo stood at the foot of the bridge, the gray book in one hand, the tuning fork in the other. His backpack felt like an anchor. Every cell in his body screamed to run. This was madness. But the alternative, the slow rewriting of his life in a cramped apartment, was a quieter, deeper madness. He stepped onto the walkway. The moment his foot touched the weathered concrete, the overlay snapped into perfect, horrifying focus. The modern chain-link fence blurred, replaced by an older, wrought iron railing. The flickering sodium lamp became a softer, gas-like glow. The sounds clarified, separated into a complex orchestra. The ping of a loose cable, E-flat. The sob of the wind through a particular lattice, G minor. The deep, foundational hum of the river. A C so low it was felt in the gut. He was no longer just Leo Mercer. He was Elias Thorne, sound engineer, standing on the bridge of his accident/death/transcendence. And he was Leo, copywriter, standing on the bridge of his impending dissolution. The two men were tuning forks vibrating at the same terrible frequency. He opened the book. The pages were no longer static. The text shimmered, the final chapters a swirling vortex of potential outcomes. He could see sentences forming and dissolving. Elias raised the device. The feedback screamed. He found a chord of forgiveness. He stepped into the silence. It's beautiful, isn't it? Leo jerked around. Finch stood at the entrance to the bridge. He looked ghastly in the uneven light, the word welts now crawling up his neck. He held one of the poisoned books from the circle, The Canopy of Lies, its cover oozing that same dark fluid. The raw potential. Finch breathed, taking a step forward. I can hear it now. A story wanted to be born. Let me help it. Let me be the editor. I'll cut out the weak protagonist. He grinned, a rictus of pain and yearning. I'll take your place in the narrative. A better fit. A man who appreciates power. You don't want the story, Leo said, his voice steady with a certainty that came from outside himself. You want the spotlight, even if it burns you alive. Same thing. Finch shrieked and hurled the using book at Leo. It never reached him. 3 feet away, it met the resonant field of the gray book. The physical novel disintegrated into a shower of vile, buzzing static, the sound of lies given voice. The static clawed at Leo's mind, suggesting failures, whispering that Rose had betrayed him, that the tuning fork was useless, that he was already dead. Leo staggered, gripping the brass fork. He needed a true note, a note of his own. He didn't strike it. He thought a sound, the sigh of the bookshop's door, the sound of curiosity, not hunger, of a safe, dusty piece. He focused on that memory and rapped the fork hard against the bridge's railing. Dinding, a pure, clean F-sharp cut through the polluted static, scattering it. It was a sound from his world, a sound with no tragedy attached. For a moment, the overlay of the past receded. The bridge was just a bridge again. Finch howled in frustration. You can't use cheap tricks. This is about grandeur. He reached into his coat, pulling out another book, this one smoking at the edges. Leo didn't wait. He turned and ran towards the center of the span, towards the flickering lamp. The book in his hand was hot, pulling him towards the epicenter, the point of maximum resonance. He knew what he had to do. He had to complete the equation. He had to find the frequency of forgiveness for the accident that never happened to him, for the loss Elias Thorne felt, for the life Leo himself had failed to live. He reached the midpoint. Below, the black river swallowed the light. Here, the overlay was complete. He saw the ghostly image of Elias Thorne's massive, bizarre sound device superimposed over the rusted girders. He felt the phantom rain on his face. He raised the tuning fork, not to strike it, but as a focus. He closed his eyes and let the book's final, unwritten chapter flood into him. He let the grief, the isolation, the artistic yearning of Elias Thorne fill him up. And then he layered his own grief onto it. The loss of his job, his relationship, his own voice. The two melodies intertwined, dissonant, painful. Finch was close now, chanting something from his rotten book, a sound like tearing metal. Leo had to finish the tune. But Rose was right. It was a choice. He could play Elias Thorne's ending, a beautiful, tragic chord of acceptance and dissolution. Or he opened his eyes. He looked at the gray book, the living, hungry story. He looked at the tuning fork, the dead tool of pure intent. He made his choice. He slammed the brass tuning fork down, not on metal, but onto the open, swirling pages of the resonance of silence. Episode 8, Feedback. The collision did not produce a sound. It produced an anti-sound. A sphere of perfect, voracious silence erupted from the point of impact, swallowing the ding of the fork, the droning of the bridge, Finch's incantation, the whisper of the river. For a 3-second eternity, there was nothing. Then the feedback hit. If the book was a speaker broadcasting a story, and the tuning fork was a microphone meant to capture pure intent, then Leo had just created the mother of all sonic loops. The story tried to consume the intent. The intent tried to nullify the story. The world tour. The visual overlay of the past ripped like a projection screen, revealing glimpses of other things. The interior of the last chapter, a glimpse of his own apartment, the composer's silent studio. The air screamed in frequencies beyond hearing, pressure waves that made the bridge tremble. The sodium lamp exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. Finch was thrown to his knees, his poisonous book bursting into flame in his hands, consuming itself with a sickly green fire. He screamed, but the sound was ripped away by the maelstrom. Leo held the point of contact, the fork fused to the pages, his hands burning with cold and heat. He was the conduit. He felt the narrative of Elias Thorne, the accident, the deafness, the quest, unspooling, not towards its destined end, but into chaotic, raw data. He felt the composer's pure, frustrated intent to make sound, flooding into the vacuum. He wasn't writing the ending. He was debugging the story. He saw the flaw, the core trauma. It wasn't the accident on the bridge. It was the composer's belief that his music had died with his hearing, that his story was over. The book was that belief given a parasitic fictional form. It sought readers not to be completed, but to confirm its own tragic truth, that creation is followed by silence. Leo, with the fork, with his own desperation to create again, was inputting a counterargument. The instrument is not broken. The tune changes. The feedback reached a crescendo. The gray book began to disintegrate, not into ash, but into millions of tiny, shimmering notes that hung in the air like static-charged dust. The tuning fork glowed white-hot. In the eye of the storm, a single, clear possibility presented itself to Leo. He could let the feedback loop collapse. It would destroy the book, sever the connection. He would be free, but hollowed out, his own creative spirit likely scorched in the blast. Or he could channel it. He could take the unraveling story and the pure creative intent, and instead of letting them annihilate each other, he could aim them. He could write one last sentence. Not for Elias Thorne. For himself. He focused every ounce of his will, every stolen nuance from the book, every spark of his own battered voice. He didn't speak. He projected the sentence into the heart of the feedback, using the fork as a stylus and the dissolving book as the page. The sentence was, "The silence after the note is not the end of the music. It is the bridge to the next." The feedback loop ceased. The chaotic energies coalesced around that single, structured thought. There was a final, deafening pop of imploding pressure. Then true silence, the kind that comes after a great noise. Not dead, but ringing with potential. Episode 9, The Aftermath. Leo was on his knees, his hands blistered, his ears ringing in the mundane way. The tuning fork lay beside him, cool and tarnished once more, a hairline crack running up its stem. Of the gray book, there was no trace. Only a faint scent of ozone and a scatter of ordinary-looking dust that glinted for a moment in the moonlight before the clouds covered it. Down the bridge, Finch was moaning. The poisonous books were gone, consumed. The welts on his skin were already fading, leaving angry red marks that looked like old scars. He looked up at Leo, his eyes cleared of fever, filled only with a hollow, bewildered shame. He didn't speak. He simply stumbled to his feet and shuffled away into the night, a man who had tried to steal magic and been burned by the mere static of its discharge. The bridge was just a bridge. The sounds were just sounds. The wind, the distant highway, the water. The overlay was gone. The pressure in Leo's soul was gone. He was profoundly, utterly empty. And in that emptiness, there was a strange, clean peace. The haunting resonance was silenced. The door to Elias Thorne's world was shut. He was just Leo Mercer on a cold bridge with burned hands. He didn't know how long he sat there. The first drops of rain began to fall, clean and cold. He got up, picked up the cracked tuning fork, and walked back the way he came. The next afternoon, he stood before the signed door of the last chapter. He pushed it open. The shop was as it always was. Dust motes danced in sunbeams. Payuaket the cat purred on a stack of gothic romances. Rose was at her desk, mending a copy of Moby Dick. She looked up as he entered. She looked tired, but a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "The bridge is quiet," she said. "It's just a bridge," Leo replied, his voice hoarse but his own. "And the book?" "Returned. For good, I think." She nodded, gesturing to the returns section. One shelf space was empty. "The space is vacant. It may fill again, with something else, or it may not." Her eyes went to the cracked tuning fork he placed on the counter. "You used the tool. You broke the story. I think I edited it, wrote a new ending. Even better." She pushed the fork back towards him. "Keep it. A souvenir. And a reminder." Leo picked it up. It felt different. Not magical, but significant. Like a medal from a war he barely understood. What was it? Really? The book. Rose leaned back, steepling her fingers. A ghost. The ghost of an unwritten novel, haunted by the composer's frustration. It was a cry for help. It needed a reader with a parallel wound to either join it in its lament or... She gestured to him to hear the pain behind the notes and answer it. "You answered it. You didn't provide the forgiveness the character sought. You provided the forgiveness the ghost needed. You forgave it for not being written. And in doing so, you forgave yourself for not writing." The truth of it settled over Leo, warm and heavy. He hadn't defeated a monster. He had given last rites to a lost idea. And me? He asked quietly. The things I heard, the overlays. The connection is severed. The channel is closed. But you open a door in your own mind, Leo. You may find the world remains a slightly more resonant place. You've trained your perception. Use it wisely. Don't listen for stories that want to use you. Listen for your own. He left the shop, the bell sighing its familiar, comforting sigh behind him. The city's sound were different, not layered with hidden meaning, but rich, complex, interesting. He heard the rhythm of a jackhammer, the melody of a busker's guitar, the harmony of overlapping conversations. They were just sounds, but they were enough. He went home. For the first time in months, he sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at the blank screen. It wasn't a taunting void anymore. It was a silent bridge, waiting for the next note. He opened a new document. His fingers hovered over the keys. He felt no pressure, no phantom narrative, no desperate need to be brilliant. He just began to type. It wasn't about a sound engineer. It was about a man in a dusty bookshop. He typed one sentence, then another. They were his words. They were clumsy, uncertain, alive. He was writing, and the silence around him was no longer hungry. It was patient. It was listening. Episode 10, A New Shelf. Weeks passed. The burns on Leo's hands healed into faint pink scars. The ringing in his ears subsided. The world held its normal shape and sound. The terror of the bridge and the longing of the book receded in a memory, vivid but contained, like a story he had read long ago. He wrote, not every day and not always well, but he wrote. He wrote about a cynical journalist discovering a town where everyone slept for 1 minute every Wednesday. He wrote about a man who heard emotions as sound. They were just exercises, finger painting with words, but they were his. The cracked tuning fork sat on his desk, a paperweight holding down the chaos of bills and notes. He went back to the last chapter once, not out of need, but out of something like kinship. Rose was arguing with a university student about the merits of a postmodern poet. Payuaket needed a blanket and a patch of sun. The returns section was no longer empty. A new book sat there, a small volume bound in sea blue leather with no title. It hummed softly, a gentle, curious frequency like a question mark. Rose caught his glance. New arrival. A travelogue. Of places that don't exist. Much less demanding tenant. She gave him a shrewd look. You look settled. I am, he said, and he meant it. As he was leaving, a man brushed past him entering the shop. He was middle-aged, harried, with the desperate look of someone searching for an answer they couldn't name. He made a beeline for the common mysteries section, his energy a jagged, anxious spike. Leo paused, watching. The man's fingers trailed over spines, restless, hungry. For a fleeting second, Leo felt the old, awful pull, not from a book, but from the man's palpable need. He saw a flicker, a possible future where the man stumbled into the returns section, where a book with a seductive, easy answer might glow for him. A story of instant success, or forgotten love returned, or vengeance. He hesitated. He could warn Rose. He could say something to the man. But he didn't. This was not his story. This was the shop's story, and Rose's and that man's. Leo was just a former reader. He had paid his late fee in fear and fire. His role was over. He stepped out into the street, the door sighing shut behind him, cutting off the world of whispers and hungry ghosts. The afternoon sun was warm on his face. Across the street, the psychic's neon sign buzzed, a mundane, electrical sound. A bus rumbled past, a chord in the city's symphony. He put his hands in his pockets, his fingers brushing the cool brass of the cracked tuning fork. He didn't need it to hear the music anymore. He was learning to make his own. He walked away and did not look back. Final episode 1. the librarian's ledger. Rain tapped a soft, irregular rhythm against the bay window of Rose Derry's apartment above the last chapter. Downstairs, the shop was dark and quiet, its stories sleeping. Up here, in her private sanctuary, the only light came from a green-shaded desk lamp, pooling on the vast, lead-bound book, the log. Payuaket was a warm, purring weight on her feet. Rose's gnarled hand, steady as a surgeon's, dipped a nib pen into an inkwell. The ink wasn't quite black. It held a subtle sheen, like a raven's feather in moonlight. She opened the log to a new, blank page. She did not write immediately. She listened, not with her ears, but with the older, deeper sense that had been her companion for 70-odd years. The shop breathed below her, a slow, tidal rhythm of narrative potential. She could feel the gentle hum of the new travelogue in returns, the steadfast silence of the log itself, the dormant whispers of 1,000 other volumes. Her pen touched the paper. Entry: Mercer, Leo James. Book: The Resonance of Silence. Unwritten. Composer's Ghost. Class 4 Amulet. Disposition: Resolved. Not destroyed. Transmuted. She paused, remembering the shockwave she'd felt from miles away as Leo had driven fork into folio on the Greyview span. It hadn't been pain. It had been a resolution, a dissonant chord finally resolving to a tonic, even if that tonic was quietude. Subject demonstrated stage 1 to 4 assimilation markers with atypical velocity. Curiositas, furtum, resonantia, incursio. Climax triggered by external antagonism. Finch, Alastair. See appendix, parasitic readers. Subject's choice was critical. He did not seek to conquer the narrative, a path to madness, nor to submit to it, a path to erasure. He sought dialogue. He introduced a foreign element, pure intent, the fork, and used the resulting feedback not as a weapon, but as a palimpsest. He wrote over the ghost's lament with a statement of continuation, a profound act of bibliotherapy. Rose allowed herself a small, dry smile. The boy had spine. Outcome: connection severed cleanly. Subject's perceptual modifications, secondary resonance, have attenuated to baseline plus 20%. No evidence of residual narrative bleed. Prognosis: positive. He is writing again. His own stories. The ghost, having delivered its message, is at rest. Shelf 7B now vacant. She blotted the entry. The ink shimmered and seemed to sink into the page, becoming part of the ledger's immutable record. One story closed, but a librarian's work is never done. She turned a few heavy pages. Earlier entries swam in her vision, histories of other readers, other hungers. Entry: Finch, Alastair. Status: active. Post-Greyview. Observation: physical stigmata faded. Psychic scarring profound. The taste of power, followed by catastrophic failure, has left a void. His hunger is now directionless, toxic to himself, but likely inert to the collection. He is a broken magnet. He will not find the door again. He will haunt ordinary bookshops, forever disappointed. Accountabilità. Monitor: low priority. She closed the log. The cat stretched. The rain softened. Rose looked out at the wet, gleaming street. Another hungry soul would come tomorrow. They always did. Some would find gentle stories to soothe them. Others would brush against darker volumes. A few, a very few, would face what Leo faced. Her job was not to protect them from the stories. Her job was to protect the stories from them, and to provide, when possible, the right tool at the right time. A ledger, a word of warning, a brass tuning fork. She turned off the lamp, surrendering to the darkness and the sound of the rain. A simple, real, unstoried sound. It was enough. Final episode 2. The Broken Magnet. The fluorescent lights of the megabooks and more hummed a flat, industrial sea. Alastair Finch stood in the self-help/success aisle, a place he now frequented with the grim devotion of a pilgrim at a dried-up well. His hand, smooth now save for faint pink scars where the words had once risen, trailed over glossy covers. Unleash your inner titan. The 5 a.m. miracle. From zero to billionaire in 100 days. The paper was slick, the fonts aggressive. They screamed, but to his inner sense, once scalded by the true, terrible music of the last chapter, they were mute. Cardboard props. Empty calories. He tried to remember the feeling. The electric promise that had vibrated from that gray book in Leo's backpack. The intoxicating, foul symphony from the circle he'd made. It had been real. It had been alive. Now the world was dead sound. Dead words. A store clerk, a chipper young woman, approached. "Can I help you find something today, sir? We have a new arrival on disruptive innovation that's just flying off the—" "Does it whisper?" Finch interrupted, his voice a rasp. He didn't look at her. Pardon, does it mean anything? Actually mean it? Or is it just ink on a page telling me what I want to hear?" The clerk took a slight step back, her professional smile faltering. "It's a bestseller," she said, as if that answered everything. Finch let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He turned and walked away, leaving the clerk bewildered. He drifted through the massive store, past mountains of cookbooks, forests of fantasy trilogies, deserts of celebrity memoirs. It was a warehouse of echoes, a museum of shadows. He was surrounded by thousands of stories, and he was starving in the midst of them. He found himself in the children's section, sitting on a tiny chair. The primary colors seemed garish. A picture book lay open on a table, a story about a brave little engine. He stared at the simple lines. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, he thought he felt a faint, warm glow, the ghost of a true story, one meant to comfort, not consume. But it was just memory, just loss. He was a broken magnet. The last chapter had shown him a polarity of existence he could never forget, and then had broken his ability to sense it. He was cursed to remember the music, but live forever in silence. He left the store, empty-handed. The city street was a barrage of meaningless noise. He walked, directionless. He passed a library, a used bookstore, a street vendor selling pirated paperbacks. He felt nothing. The hunger was still there, a hollow ache in his gut, but it had no object. It was pure, undirected craving. He stopped on a bridge, not the Grayview span, but a mundane concrete overpass. He looked down at the traffic, a river of light and metal. For a second, a dangerous thought flickered. What if I jump? Would that be an ending worth reading? But he knew the truth. It wouldn't. It would just be a sad paragraph in a police blotter. A full stop. No dissonance. No meaning. He turned and walked home to his sterile apartment. He had a shelf of the best-selling books he'd bought, all unread. They were his tombstone, a monument to the hunger that had met something too powerful to eat and had been broken on its teeth. Alastair Finch was no longer a threat. He was a warning to himself. And his story, now, was one of the quietest and most terrible of all. The story of a man who had almost touched magic and was now doomed to a life without it. Final episode 3, The Next Note. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, the bell above the door of the last chapter sighed. Leo stepped in. He carried no desperation, only a small, respectful curiosity. The smell of paper and time washed over him, familiar but no longer intoxicating. Payuakit opened his one eye, regarded him, and closed it again, deeming him neither threat nor supplicant. Rose was at her usual place. She looked up, and her flinty eyes softened a degree. Mr. Mercer, to what do I owe the pleasure? Not shopping for returns, I hope. Leo smiled. No, I brought you something. He placed a slender, unassuming manuscript box on the counter. It was plain cardboard, tied with string. It's not for the returns shelf. It's for you, if you want it. A first draft. Rose didn't touch it. She looked at the box, then at him. Your story. A story. The one about the journalist and the sleeping town. It's done. As done as it can be. And you bring it to me? Not to an agent, a publisher. You were the first person who ever talked to me about stories as living things. About fair trades. I owe you more than a late fee. He pushed the box gently towards her. Consider it a thank you, and a return of sorts. Not of a book, but of the result. Slowly, Rose untied the string and lifted the lid. She didn't read it. She placed her palm flat on the top page. She closed her eyes for a long moment. The shop was still. She opened her eyes. It's quiet, she said. Is that good? It's yours, she said, and it was the highest compliment she could give. It has its own voice. No boasts, no echoes, just a story. A good one, I think. There's tension, heart, a clear, steady frequency. She carefully closed the box. I will read it. Properly. Leo nodded. A weight he hadn't known he was carrying lifting from his shoulders. He turned to go. Leo, Rose called out. He paused. She wasn't looking at him, but at the returns section. The sea blue travelogue was gone. In its place was a small, clay-red book with a symbol etched into its cover that looked like a keyhole. The vacancy didn't last long, she said, almost to herself. Then she looked at him. You know you're always welcome here. As a visitor, not everything that comes through that door needs fixing. Sometimes it's just a visit. Thank you, Rose. One more thing, she said, a rare, full smile touching her lips. The ending of your manuscript. It's a choice. I like it. It's honest. He hadn't told her the ending. He simply smiled back, nodded, and left. The door sighed, shut behind him. Rose looked down at the manuscript box. She did not place it on a shelf. She carried it upstairs to her private quarters. She would read it by the window, with a cup of tea, as what it was, a story offered freely, a thing created, not consumed. Down in the shop, the new clay-red book on shelf 7B began to emit a soft, inviting pulse, like a heartbeat heard through a pillow. It was a story about locks and the things people lock away. It was waiting for the right reader, someone with a key-shaped hole in their life. Outside, Leo walked down the street. He pulled a cracked tuning fork from his pocket. He didn't strike it. He just held it, feeling its weight, its history, its final, silent crack. Then he put it away. He didn't need it as a talisman anymore. The story was written. The note had been played. The silence that followed was just to fill, not with borrowed echoes, but with the next, true note of his own making. He turned the corner and was gone, leaving the street to its ordinary sounds and the bookshop to its patient, everlasting whisper. The end.